So hello there guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you guys are all doing well. I hope that you're staying safe wherever you are around the world. F1 is finally back after a very long interlull period in between the first few races and the race coming up this weekend in Azerbaijan. F1 is finally returning to our screens this weekend, and I certainly cannot wait to see the latest installment of the 2023 Formula One World Championship. It feels like an absolute eternity. Now, I know we had a very long winter break period, and in some ways that's probably compartmentalized into this very difficult, actually compounded is probably the right word. It's made it feel so much longer that we've had a long break after only a few races. And I know a lot of you are probably thinking, oh, well, you know, what stories are there going to be to tell following what we've seen in the first few races? It's going to be more Red Bull and Max Verstappen dominance. There's certainly that element to it, but there's going to be plenty more stories throughout this season. And if we kind of judge this on a race-by-race basis, I think in some ways, if you are not a Red Bull or a Max Verstappen fan, or if you're just a neutral fan that wants to enjoy some exciting action, maybe we should just focus on one race at a time. And what a venue it is as well. The venue of the first sprint weekend in Formula One in 2023. Now, of course, there have been some format changes, which we will get into momentarily. Of course, joining me on this episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast for this preview, we have DNF1 panel member Lee Wallington joining us once again. Lee, first of all, how are you doing, mate? And of course, how excited are you that F1 is coming back to our screens this weekend after a mini hiatus, if you like?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this weekend. I've been in F1 deprivation mode for the last few weeks, so it's nice to be looking forward to a race weekend. Obviously, they start to come thick and fast now as we approach the summer part of the season, although it's not quite summer yet, or the European leg, whichever terminology you prefer. But and especially the rule changes as well. It's going to make it an exciting or different weekend, depending on your point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we've got a lot of races coming thick and fast to us right now, so we're certainly not going to be starved of F1 content over the next few weeks and months ahead. And rightly pointed out, this is now the beginning of the European leg of the season, the time where a lot of the teams have had plenty of opportunities to reflect, rest and recuperate based on what we saw in the first few races. And of course, we will see the first few rafts of upgrades coming into the 2023 paddock, which may change the pecking order. We'll have to wait and see if it has the potential to do that. Very exciting stuff. Of course, guys, as we always ask of you, if you are new to us at DNF1, whether you watch these podcasts on YouTube, please help us out. Subscribe to the channel, help us get to 2,000 subs by the end of the season. That's our lofty, but I think realistic goal for us this season. We went past 1,000 just before the season started, so we'd really appreciate if you helped us out on that journey. Of course, like the video. As always, if you follow us on your favorite pod platform, make sure to give us a 5-star review on your favorite pod platform. It really helps us out a lot, and we cannot thank you enough. For those of you that left us kind reviews, of course, if you are on Spotify and you leave us a few reviews, as some of you have, we'd love to give you a shout out if you give us a 5-star review. So if you do that, let us know on our social media. We have our links in the show notes. If you're listening to this podcast, of course, if you watch this podcast, you want to get in touch with us, you can do so on your favorite social media platform. You'll see the handles below. Now, all the plugging out of the way, let's talk about the revisions, the new sprint weekend format. And there have been some quite interesting changes. We've had sprint races for a couple of seasons now, and I think it's fair to say that when we kind of assess a sprint weekend or assess how we've viewed sprint races so far since they've been introduced into Formula One a couple of years ago, I think there is room for improvement. I think overall they have been a relative success. I'm not going to lie to you guys and say that I think they have been the most fantastic thing to come into Formula One since they decided to put 4 wheels on the car. I know it's a terrible joke, but I do feel there is room for improvement or room to make this better. I'm kind of glad that they haven't decided to roll this out to every single race weekend. I mean, there's arguments to be made for and against on that one. We're going to have 6 sprint races this season, and the new sprint weekend format, which we will see at this weekend's race in Baku, will go as follows. So we have Friday, which is going to be qualifying day for the main race. We're going to have free practice one free practice session throughout the entire weekend. So obviously less practice, which some fans are happy about, some not so much. And then that's going to be followed by qualifying for the main race. Now, we saw qualifying happen on a Friday a lot, and that used to be for the sprint race. That is now no longer the case. It's for the main race on Sunday. Same qualifying format with Q1, Q2, Q3, and unlimited choice of tyres that are available to each of the teams within the allocation. Saturday is sprint day. That's going to be the qualifying sprint shootout, and that pretty much works exactly the same as Friday qualifying does, except this time Q1 will be 12 minutes instead of 18. Q2 will be, actually no, is that right? No, it's 15, yeah, sorry. Q1's 12 minutes, medium tyres only, rather than an unlimited choice of tyres between the hard, soft and mediums. Q2 will also be a medium only tyre session for 10 minutes. Q3 will be 8 minutes, only using the soft tyres. Now, the logic behind that, some of you may be asking, but why is that different to Friday qualifying? Well, the teams only have a certain allocation of tyres available to them. So to save on having loads and loads and loads of soft tyres for qualifying, they're going to be mandated to use medium tyres in Q1 and Q2 in the sprint qualifying shootout on Saturday morning. That is then followed by the sprint race. Now, the difference between the sprint race in 2023 and the sprint race in 2022 or 2021, if you like, the result of the sprint race will no longer determine the grid for Sunday's race. That is now reserved exclusively for Friday qualifying. So, of course, you have everyone doing the sprint race. Same rules as a normal sprint race, except no grid determined from that for the race on Sunday. Of course, the point system will be exactly the same. The top 8 finishers will score points 8 all the way down to 1 in 8th place. And then, of course, the finale, Sunday's main race. The grid already determined by Friday qualifying, as we've established. And, of course, the same rules and regulations apply. Of course, the FIA have also mentioned that any penalties in qualifying on Friday will go into the sprint race, and any grid penalties on the Saturday sprint will go to Sunday. A lot of information there, so hopefully I broke it down well enough for you guys to follow. But Lee, first things first, what do you make of the changes to the sprint weekend format? Are you happy with them, or do you not so much like them?
Well, firstly, unlike Formula One, it's very late in the day to make changes to a format weekend just before weekend. Normally there's all this, oh, I don't agree with this, and we take 6 months to make a decision. They've done it just before the first sprint weekend, so that is a surprise on itself. But on the changes, I think it's the right choices to make. They've seemed to rectify some of the complaints that were made about the last 2 seasons of the sprint weekend. Obviously, now got sprint Saturday. It's been named. Obviously, there's none of this talk about sprint qualifying. They've just called it what it is, a sprint race, and qualifying is now qualifying. And obviously clarified some of the penalties. I'm sure they haven't thought of everything, because in the Formula One rule book, there'll be a scenario that comes up they haven't even thought about, and they go, damn, what do we do now? We haven't thought of that one. So I'm sure that will come up as well. But it does sound interesting in how they have done it and how they've laid it out. And the mandating the tyres, I mean, some teams really struggle to switch on the medium tyres, especially for a fast lap, where others can just turn them on. So, I mean, you could get some surprise results where teams that you expect to get through in a sprint qualifying may struggle to get through because they can't switch on those medium tyres. So it will shake up the grid to a certain degree for the sprint race.
Well, I'm glad that you segued us into this, because I was surfing through social media this morning whilst I was doing my prep for this podcast, and our buddy Blake, aka Break on F1, give him a follow on Twitter, former Red Bull engineer as well, so obviously definitely worth a follow. He mentioned that they have resurfaced the track area in Baku, and that should create quite interesting racing this weekend, because of course, for most people that will remember, when usually track surfaces are relayed, it often creates difficulties in getting the tyres up to temperature. And that is an element that you've just mentioned already with the medium tyres. And let's not forget, Baku is not an easy circuit to get your tyre temps warmed up. And, you know, we've seen in previous races in the past where teams would try to go for a really crazy undercut, if you like, and they can't get the tyres warmed up, and they end up being overcut by those that decide to stay out on older, worn tyres, but they're still in the working window in terms of temperature, so they're still able to extract some performance where you can't get out of the new tyres that you can't really warm up properly. So that will be interesting as well. I think he cited Kota a few years ago where they did the same thing, and it was absolute bedlam. So that could be a factor this weekend. In terms of the sprint race itself, I don't know I'm a fan or not of what they've done with the sprint element to it, because I thought one of the best parts of the sprint weekend from what we've known over the past few years is that the outcome of the sprint race does play a factor into the main race on Sunday. Now, if you don't score points, the one thing that you had to fight for outside the top 8, if you like, or even when it was first introduced, it was the top 3, is that there was a reward for you finishing higher up in the sprint race, going for broke, and you may get a better grid position. If you've got a better race car, you could be rewarded for that by having a better grid position on Sunday. That's now gone. And the sprint race itself has now pretty much been isolated as its own part of the weekend, separate from the main race itself. Now, some people will probably say, well, that's probably a good thing, because I think the problem with sprint races in the past is that some people that probably felt they weren't quite quick enough to get points would not want to risk it out of fear of getting a worse grid position on Sunday. I would argue the opposite and say, actually, I think that is probably the only carrot you can really dangle to the driver, so to speak, in terms of wanting to get a better result in the sprint race. Because, I mean, you know, hypothetically speaking, if you're Yuki Tsunoda, who's been hanging around 10th and 11th place, yes, there is something to fight for there. But if you're a few places further down and you don't really have the car capable of doing it, I can't see the incentive for the driver really wanting to push the boat out to try and finish higher in the sprint race. And I feel that element there may create problems at this point in time. Some people have argued also with finances that, you know, that they want to put on a good show, because the better the show the sprint races cause, the more money that comes into the sport, and through the revenue distribution that we have in F1, the teams will get a larger portion of that overall revenue, if you like, if this is a success rather than if it was a failure and people were switching off. So I get that, but the drivers aren't going to care about that. That's more the company element. The driver's like, well, if I can't fight to try and get into the top 8, what's the incentive for me trying to push this car to the point where I may damage it or have reliability issues and stuff if I'm going to get no reward for it in the main race? So, yeah, overall, I'm not really a fan of separating the sprint race from the actual main race when we have these sprint weekends. I kind of feel like the old format was better, but, you know, that's my opinion. Lee, what do you make of that? Do you agree, or do you feel that these changes are a good thing?
I mean, I understand your point, what you're getting at, and to a degree, I do agree with you about that carrot, so to speak. But I do think some of these changes address some of the complaints that I had about the previous parts of the sprint weekend. However, I still don't think it's going to be working as great as they imagine it to be. I still think there would be some further refinement, because that issue that you just mentioned still remains, that that carrot has now been removed. And I do agree. I think some drivers won't find motivation, especially if you're down in at the moment in an Alpha Tauri or the old McLaren. We have to wait and see about the new McLaren, but we'll get to that later. Where I'm going to be 18th, 19th. I'm not going to get it to 8. Why bother just trundle around? So maybe they have to look at doing something to motivate the midfield a bit more. But I'm sure that there will be some further refinement about this format.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what is good about this new format and why it could possibly be a success, despite the fact that I disagree with the logic behind it, is that we don't really have a backmarker team anymore. Like, last season, the obvious backmarker was Williams. The season before that, it was Haas by some margin. And Lee, for as long as you and I have watched F1, there's always been teams that have been obvious backmarkers. I mean, I remember a time when we first started watching Formula One in the mid to late 90s, when we had teams being lapped about 10 laps into a race and used to get lapped like 5 or 6 times. It was ridiculous. Like, nowadays, that's unheard of unless something stupid happens. And, you know, I don't know, you could think of a plethora of reasons for it, but at the same time, we don't really have any backmarker teams anymore. I could easily see a scenario where every single driver on this grid that currently isn't in either a Ferrari, Aston Martin, Red Bull or Mercedes thinking P7 or P8 is realistic in the same way that it would do with P9 or P10. I don't think anyone genuinely believes on this grid that they can't score points right now. And I think that's reflected by a stat I saw the other day, that this is the first season, I think in F1 history, where every single team as in the Constructors' Championship has at least scored a point after the first 3 races, which I think just goes to show, you know, people will say, oh, well, the point system has been expanded to allow more teams an opportunity to score points. And I think that's fair. But I do also think that that has come naturally by the fact that these new rules that have been put in place have allowed us to have a midfield where you can't really pick a team that's dead last every single week. Like, everybody has a realistic chance if they put it all together. And I think in the sprint series this season, we may see every driver think, I could finish in the top 8, even if they qualify dead last.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The midfield is a lot closer. I really have enjoyed the midfield battles so far. So, and especially in a track like Baku, where it can get a bit unpredictable, which is something that I'm potentially looking forward to about the sprint weekend. You can never hold your bets about being qualifier last, but you end up being 8th because there's been a crash fest ahead. And let alone think all the work the engineers have to do for the actual race on Sunday. So it could be a very interesting weekend.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, I think we should give it a chance. I think that the sprint weekends, as I said already, I don't think they've been amazing, but I don't think they've been bad. We do need to give this a chance. And I think under the current format, where we only have like 1/4 of the whole season when we have sprint weekend, I think that's kind of enough. I don't think we really need to increase it anymore. I know F1 would like to, because they obviously want to try and extract as much revenue as, you know, feasibly possible, I suppose. But I think we have a system that I think the fans are happy enough with. I know some people have expressed discontent over Friday qualifying, which will become a very huge part of this weekend now, as it makes up the grid for Sunday's race, happening midday, at least in the UK. I think it's like 2:30 p.m. I think the main race qualifying is going to happen on a Friday. I also would argue to that, whilst I understand that point, is that it's going to be different from other races when we have other sprint races. I mean, we've got one in Austria. We've got, so obviously there's an hour difference there. We've got one in not Miami, in Kota, I think. Is it Kota we got one? I know we got one in America. I can't remember which one. But my point is that Baku is an outlier. I know some people aren't happy about it, but Baku's like 3 hours ahead of London. Assuming you're listening to this podcast in the UK, you probably relate. If you're not listening to it, then obviously you can adjust based on the time difference from where you are to Baku. So I think I understand that point. I just think in terms of how they've scheduled it, they've probably given us a lot of thought. I imagine they have. And it's not a perfect system, but there is certainly room to try here. And I don't feel we're too far away from a perfect system, you know, but again, you know, we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, well, on the Fridays, yeah, it is a bit annoying. Obviously, if you're especially a hardcore fan and you have to work, it does become hard of how to watch your favorite sport. But at the same time, they're F1 obviously trying to make Friday a bigger income earner. So if you're going to attend the race weekend, some people just previously do qualifying on the Saturday and the Sunday, skip the Friday, save yourself a bit of money. But now you want to see the weekend, so you're going to pay for the bigger ticket, which increase revenue, especially if you can replicate it across the whole calendar. That's more money for the teams in the end Formula One. So I can understand from where they're trying to push this. But yeah, it would suck if you have to miss it, and then there's the whole thing of, oh, I'll watch it a replay, I'll watch the highlights, and then this spoil. I hate that when I miss it in a live event and you try and avoid spoilers for that. It's so hard in today's time.
Yeah.
So I feel for the fans. I know it's going to happen to me at some point, and it's probably going to happen to you that you miss it on a Friday.
Yeah, apparently so. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. At this point in time, I'm sure everyone's, you know, it's not the same for everybody. It's just one thing that I know I've heard a few people mention, and I'm sure F1 have factored this in. But again, it's going to be different wherever you watch this around the world. There might be people watching this or listening to this podcast right now in certain parts of the world where this isn't really a relevant factor because of the time difference is so vast that it doesn't really matter to them so much. They can watch this regardless. Or some people may have to get up at 4 a.m. to watch these races on a regular basis. You know, you kind of have to take it for what it's worth wherever you are from. So, and it's a global sport. It's not based in the UK as much as our British bias would allow us to want it to be. It's not. It's a global sport. Also, I think it's worth mentioning is the reduction in practice. Now, we always lose a practice session from sprint weekends. And in the past, practice 2 has often been considered to be rather pointless, other than just a tyre running exercise, because they're locked in Parc Fermé from FP1, and then they have FP2 after the before the sprint. And it's like, well, what's the after the sprint, I should say. It's like, what's the point of doing it? Now they've gotten rid of that. They're just having one practice session on the Friday morning. Andrew Chauvelin at Mercedes has had his thoughts on this, and I'm going to read a quote from him regarding this. And he says, when you've only got FP1, it's practically impossible to condense all the usual learnings across Friday and Saturday into one session. You lose the opportunity to focus on the long run, and you've got to think about what the real priorities are. Now, from an engineering perspective, I sympathise, because of course these teams are always going to want to have as much data as possible to try and get the best result in the races and qualifying. As a fan, on the other hand, I feel that this is actually a step in the right direction. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind watching practice, and I'm sure if you go to the races live, practice to you, it doesn't really matter too much. I know there isn't much on the line. You'll watch it, you'll still enjoy it, because it's an opportunity to see the cars go round, perhaps more so than you would do in a sprint race, for example, because obviously they may do more laps in a practice session. But at the same time, there's an added element of jeopardy, the diving into the unknown, if you like, where you may see some spontaneity, some randomness with results that are caused by the fact they haven't been able to optimize setups. And we often find, Lee, that even after 3 practice sessions, teams struggle to do that. So right now, we're in a position where there is a possibility on sprint weekends where we may have the opportunity to upset the order a little bit here. And as a fan, I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, it really upset the order. And another thing that I think about is, obviously, FP1 will be still in the Friday morning, which is the least representative times for the actual main event. But then it's also unrepresentative for the sprint race, but it's representative for the sprint qualifying. So you could really, if you go, oh, the car's perfect for my Friday morning, it's great Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, oh, damn, where's my car? And it can really turn up some really random wildcard results if the engineers get caught out by changing track temperature or things like that.
Well, this is it ties in with what our buddy Blake was saying earlier about on his socials about the fact that they've, you know, they re-rubbered the track surface, that it is going to create these issues because, of course, by the time they do practice, the track's going to be at its most green, and by the time they get to Sunday, obviously, naturally, it's the same everywhere, but there's going to be a lot going on this weekend that is going to be very relevant to the overall outcome of this weekend for a lot of teams and drivers. And what they're going to find is that what they learned through practice is going to be nowhere near as relevant to where they end up on Sunday. And there's so much going on in between, and they're going to be locked in Parc Fermé for a lot of that. So FP1 is going to be critical. I suppose in a way, the good news is that for anyone that likes practice, you're going to see a lot of action during practice, because that's the one session where people are going to be able to do any test runs or anything like that. So it's going to be a very condensed session. I suppose in a way, Lee, probably pressure on the drivers to not bin it or cause a red flag where you end up losing that time.
There's going to be a lot of pressure on the engineers and the drivers to obviously perform at their best for this, especially for this first weekend of this new format, I should say. And yeah, you just feel sorry for if there is a driver this weekend that bins it on the Friday morning. That's going to suck for the sport. If it's red flag, there you go. There's half an hour lost. I mean, what a chaotic weekend we'll be in for if that happened, unfortunately.
Well, what was it, Russell the other year in the Williams when he drove over the the drain cover, and it just completely went off, and there was a red flag, and it just obviously if that happens this weekend, it's going to mess with a lot of people's weekend. So that will be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out. So keep an eye on that one, of course. So interesting changes. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Are you a fan of the new changes for the sprint weekend? And be interested to read your thoughts in the comment section. Let's move on. As we talked about Mercedes already, I think it's a nice way to segue into the next piece of big news, and that's James Allison moving back into the technical director's role from the chief technical officer role that he was holding at Mercedes. Himself and Mike Elliot, the former technical director, has now moved back into that CTO role. So a bit of a swap at Mercedes there, Lee. What do you make of that from Mercedes?
Well, firstly, I wonder, did they swap salaries as well? But
no, if anything, it's one of those situations where, despite how things have gone for Mike Elliott this season as TD at Mercedes, he's practically been given a promotion. And in a way, for James Allison, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it's a very good decision, I think, for Mercedes. Obviously, Mike Elliot and James Allison have their own specialties and specialisms and where they excel. And James Allison is definitely better on the technical design aspect and the overall car flow. So getting back on, obviously, he's not going to have much of an impact on this year's car. But where you'll see his fingerprints will be on next year's car, and maybe even towards later in the season, maybe directing upgrades on this car. But I definitely think it's the right choice for Mercedes, getting that level of knowledge back into the team track side and just driving the car development into, even as I said, next year is vital for their championship challenge for next year. I know it's still a long way. We've still got over 20 races of the season left, but teams obviously have to think this far and ahead and even further to host their championship challenge. Get the words out, Lee.
Well, I mean, that's very important. I think what I like about this news from Mercedes is that I can totally understand for some people that are Mercedes fans will be relatively excited by the return of James Allison. Now, I agree with you. I think this is more in pursuit of a long-term goal rather than trying to make some short-term changes. Although, people that listen to this show know that we love a football metaphor when it comes to Formula One. And I think this is an appropriate one here. This is one of those scenarios where we could see the equivalent of a new manager bounce in football, in Formula One. Now, obviously, anyone that watches both sports will know that Formula One, you can't literally just jump in the car and it's the exact same car and expect to win if you're struggling to finish in the top 5 or 6 places. Now, I know Mercedes aren't doing that. They're a bit better than that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a football team can go out and beat another team one week when they probably wouldn't have done when they got a new manager in. In F1, it's a bit more difficult than that. That being said, Mercedes personnel or engineers, not suggesting for a second here that they've dropped the ball or anything like that, but the last 2 years, they've produced pretty much a dog of a car. It's not been good enough to fight for world championships. They won one race last year where they were really, really good. But in fairness to them, I wouldn't exactly call the W13 a race-winning car. I don't think many Mercedes fans would want to call it that either. If anything, they'd probably refer to it as an outlier for how bad things were and why we can't go back there again. We'll have to wait and see how that turns out. With this switch here, I can see a lot of personnel at Mercedes coming into the factory, seeing James Allison there on a day-to-day, something that they wouldn't have been used to over the last few years since he moved into that CTO role. And I suppose the way that James deals with things compared to Mike, not saying that Mike Elliot is bad and James Allison is good, because the two of them have worked in tandem together for so many years, like they did at Lotus and Renault in the past, and to much success then. So I think there is going to be a boost at Mercedes here. I don't necessarily think that's going to turn into great results straight away, or they're going to be winning races or fighting for world championships, but that boost of morale and that optimism, I suppose, that James probably brings to a team. I mean, if you've ever watched James Allison on YouTube on the Mercedes YouTube channel, talking about the new cars or talking about certain facets of Formula One cars, how they kind of go hand in hand, you could sit there and listen to him talk for hours and just be completely lost in the journey that he takes you along that. And as I said, I'm not going to compare him to Mike Elliott here, but on that basis alone, I do feel there is something. I don't want to get Mercedes fans' hopes up here, because I don't genuinely believe that this is going to turn Mercedes into a race-winning team or a world championship-winning team until at least 2024 here. We've got to look at the long-term goal and the long-term issues here. But I think it's a nice way of being able to bring someone that has had, for the lack of a better way of putting it, a rest from the day-to-day activities at Mercedes, working on more of an operational level, the organizational structure, not having to work on a technical level on a day-to-day basis, moving back into that after a nice period of recuperation, if you like, where he may feel energized, ready to really get back into the day-to-day. And having someone like Mike Elliot, who has great leadership qualities, is very good at what he does, and Mercedes have put him into a position where he may actually be stronger there in the short term and take him out of the firing line, where, let's be honestly, for the last 2 years, everyone's been going, why is this car not good enough? Why you still got no side pods? When are we getting the new side pods? Are these upgrades going to be good? Or what direction are you going to go in for 2024? He must hate that. So I'm pretty sure he's certainly glad he's out of that. And I'm also glad Mercedes haven't done a Ferrari here and just fire him, because clearly they have acknowledged that this is a guy that's got a lot of talents and they need to move him elsewhere temporarily and bring someone back in that can, I suppose, fix or at least try and make sense of these issues that they have been suffering over the last couple of years.
Well, as an organization, Mercedes seem to have always been one that promotes from within and develops their internal staff, and definitely doesn't have that blame culture that Ferrari unfortunately has built over the years. And I think you could probably put a big chunk of that down to Toto Wolff and how he runs an organization, and he's very much the team builder person. So the fact that they've highlighted the strengths and internally of both these men and where to deploy them to the best benefit of the organization, not just as the race team, but as obviously the organization as a whole, because obviously the CTO, we're having still some involvement with the yacht racing. So it's very much a big part of the organization. And you got to say hats off. There's the opinions on Toto Wolff, not, you got to say hats off into how he runs an organization and the culture he's nurtured and developed over the years at Mercedes. And obviously not every team can duplicate that. And obviously I hope Ferrari can duplicate that, because it's horrible to see the firing nature that has been in the past at Ferrari.
Well, I mean, that's often the way in Formula One. I mean, and, Mike Elliot is someone that has worked his way through the ranks, especially at Mercedes, to get into this senior position, only for things to not really work out for him as a technical director. Now, I mean, when he was technology director at Mercedes, he was a huge part of a lot of these championship winning cars. And a lot of people would probably overlook that because of how bad things have been in the last couple of years. Now, at the same time, we can't sit there as well. Whilst it's easy to cast blame at the technical director for Mercedes' shortcomings with their car and this concept, which has pretty much proven to have been a failure in terms of what they wanted to achieve here. The Red Bull concept is streaks above anything else right now, and that seems to be the path that eventually everybody will go down in their own way. Now, I'm not suggesting here that Mercedes have looked to that and thought, oh, well, we're going to blame Mike Elliot. Far from it. I mean, this is a sum of, every team is the sum of their parts, and it would have been an organizational decision. They would have all agreed this structure. It wouldn't have been Mike Elliott's plan, or we're all just going to follow it blindly, and if it goes wrong, it's your fault. We see, as I said, I mentioned Ferrari, but this is often what they tend to do sometimes. They tend to, well, you're the one that's signing this off, so it's your fault. And Mercedes have recognised that this is someone here that has strengths elsewhere that we can utilise and bring James Allison back. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that this decision is going to turn Mercedes into world champions by the end of this year or even by the end of next year. But I feel like this is a decision that has been made knowing that James has that ability to galvanise the troops, if you like, get everybody on side, obviously acknowledge where things have gone wrong for them and learn about where things can be improved. And I'm not saying it's going to happen today, but maybe somewhere along the line, he may have ideas which may allow Mercedes to come up with a concept which is on par with what Red Bull were doing, but they could do a little bit better. And ultimately, that's the end goal for Mercedes right now. I'm not saying Mike Elliot can't do that, but Mercedes have made that conscious decision on, in line of where they were over the winter, where they were very early to acknowledge that there were issues with this car. That's kind of fallen in tandem with their strategy. So this still has ways to go before it's going to get better, but it's nice to see Mercedes not just saying, okay, we're going to bring someone back in who we know can get us back to where we want to be, and we're going to get rid of the person that has worked for us tirelessly over the last several years and worked his way up. as if he's completely useless. That is not the case at all. So I'm glad Mercedes have done it that way.
Oh yeah, I'm glad they've done it that way too, and it is really impressive to see the organization being mature and retaining staff. Obviously, they're people at the end of the day, and they'll be happy in the jobs they do. So it's very important that they are happy, and you obviously maybe press releases, but they're happy about their new roles or their old roles in James's case, and it's we look to see what the future brings for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as I said, I don't think we can get our hopes up just yet for Mercedes. No. I think we have to be patient with them. But this is certainly a step in the right direction. And who knows, it may be a nice little waiver to incentivize Lewis Hamilton to sign a new contract, of course, with the team as it's up at the end of the season. Maybe that's something they wanted to do to try and keep him there as a sweetener for the next few years or so. We'll have to wait and see. I want to move on to McLaren, and they've also had some big changes as well. And obviously, for those of you that haven't been following so far, McLaren had a very difficult winter period. They very early acknowledged that the car concept that they're currently on right now wasn't going to work out for them. So then they kind of started from scratch almost. James Key, the technical director, has been moved on following the departure of Andreas Seidel, being replaced by Andreas Steller as the team principal. They've now set up a new three-man team, and just making sure I got my notes right on here, with Peter Prodromou, the technical director of aerodynamics. Then, of course, you've got Neil Holdley, the technical director of engineering and design, and Ferrari's David Sanchez, who won't be joining them until January 2024 because he's on gardening leave. He's going to be the technical director of the car concept and performance. And, of course, Peter, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be supported by Giuseppe Pesce in that aero role as well. So a new three-man team in place, or three-person team, if you like, in place to replace the existing technical structure. And Andreas Steller's rationale for this, Lee, was that he felt that the current system that they have was a bit too restrictive with all the decisions being made through James Key, and that it's now been sort of separated into separate remits where hopefully better and quicker decisions will be made in the development of this car. Fast forward to where we are in Baku. McLaren started off the season with a very difficult car. Despite that, currently lie fifth in the Constructors' Championship, which I think would have been a best case scenario in their minds, given where they thought the car would be. And at some points it's been the 9th fastest, others it's been the 8th fastest. It's not been anywhere near as good as they would like it to be. Fast forward to Baku, it looks like now McLaren are going to bring their first major upgrade, which should be quite similar to where they would have wanted to have been at the start of the season. So they're still playing catch up a little bit. It's the first upgrade of its size of 3 upgrades were expected from McLaren this season. Not quite the B-spec car though. I don't think a cost cap era will allow for a B-spec car because you need a new chassis with that, technically speaking, to be a B-spec car. So a lot expected at McLaren here. But overall, Lee, are we expecting McLaren this weekend to really turn up and try and be at the upper end of the midfield? Or do you think this is part of a longer term solution and we're just expecting steady progress? Because before, McLaren were quite optimistic it was the former.
I think it's probably there somewhere between the two, that they expected to close the gap towards the front. Obviously, hoping not to be as far back as some of their performances have been in the last few races. But I think it's very much going to be a more long-term thing. So obviously, just bringing upgrades to the car is one step, but understanding the upgrades, delivering the performance on the upgrades on a race weekend in and out is another step. And obviously developing those upgrades further. So they could bring their updates to the car and they could still be the 9th fastest team. So especially on a weekend when there's very limited practice. So it limits their opportunity to understand their updates. And on top of that, the nature of Baku based on previous races, maybe there's a shortage of parts of the updates, so they want to try and preserve or care and not obviously get them damaged. So there's a lot that may not be revealed or reflected in the performance from McLaren regarding these updates. So it's obviously, I wish that they were going to be bam, they're up there and they're fighting with the other top teams. But it's I think it's still too early to say it's going to fix their woes this season.
Yeah, and I think what's important for McLaren as well is making use of the resources that they have. And, with Andrea Seidel, he was very much against trying to use all these resources to a point where you can imply that he was thinking about the long-term picture and that McLaren needed to get some new resource available to them, better infrastructure before they could really put their foot down and try and, move up the grid as they would have liked to as part of this long-term plan that they had. Andrea Stella has been quoted in saying that they have strong resources available and in the short term, and they're going to make tactical use of those resources. So there seems to be a different tactic, I suppose, in terms of where to bring McLaren going forward right now. And would you say at this point in time, Lee, that going into this weekend, as I said, McLaren 5th in the Constructors' Championship after a great result for Norris and Oscar Piastri in Australia, which really helped their cause, is there a lot of pressure on McLaren right now to make a huge step up the pecking order this weekend in order to gain confidence in what their plan is long term? And by extension, is this a weekend where Zak Brown's leadership at McLaren could come under question if McLaren are still floundering after what they consider to be a B-spec version of their car?
I think it's too early to say question Zak Brown's leadership, but if they go a couple of races and McLaren are still floundering, as you put it, I wouldn't be surprised if questions start getting asked higher up in the McLaren ownership regarding where Zak Brown's leadership is taking the team, because obviously the Bahrain Investment Group is one of the major shareholders in the team, and obviously they want performance from the team. But as I said, the upgrades themselves, I think it's too early to judge it on one weekend. I think you're going to need to see it over multiple race weekends, which we're obviously going to get thick and fast now. And then in a few races' time, they still haven't delivered on their upgrades. Then I'll be like, okay, this isn't working. It's just with one free practice, they just can't extract the performance from this major upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, if this upgrade proves to be successful, it's going to set the tone really well for what they'll have planned with their next major upgrade apparently coming before the summer break and then the final one after the summer break. So it really has the potential to shape its 2023 season. Of course, at this point, being 5th in the Constructors' Championship with the machinery they had available is obviously a huge achievement for them. I know they set the goal of trying to be 4th fastest. I don't know if that's still realistic, because I think they probably set that in mind of the fact that they didn't expect Aston Martin to be mixing it up with the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari at this point in time fighting for P2. So I still think it's possible for McLaren to finish P5 right now, but I think if they're going to do that, they kind of need to make a significant step forward this weekend. Where that puts them overall, I'm not so sure, but it's more about trying to find confidence in this concept route that they've gone down, and they've obviously invested a lot of time and money into abandoning what they had that didn't work and trying to expect this one to bear fruit for them. So best of luck to them. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out for this weekend.
Oh yeah, it's definitely they need the best of luck for their step forward. And obviously you're saying about this step P4 out of the way for the constructors, but we'll see how Ferrari keeps falling. That's always a big question.
Yeah, well, we're speaking of managing expectations. I think that should bring us on to the next topic of this preview. And, we've mentioned Mercedes already. We've mentioned Ferrari. We've got to bring Aston Martin into this equation as well. Now, at the start of the season, Lee, we had 3 teams that I don't think any of us expected were going to be fighting on the same piece of track, let alone the fact that Aston Martin is right now the best of those 3 at this point in time. But those 3 teams would have had very different expectations for this season. Would have had Mercedes, who would have expected to try and be back in the championship fight with Red Bull. Ferrari, perhaps to make progress going forward, but obviously hoping that committing to their concept was not going to, create a free fall for them, as it seems to have done at this point in time. And Aston Martin would have hoped to have led the midfield battle. As it stands, none of those 3 teams are doing exactly what they thought they would be doing. Aston Martin, the only one of those 3 that are actually gone above and beyond their expectations. So moving on to this second phase of the 2023 season, what do you think the new goals of these 3 teams relatively will be at this point in time?
Well, I think right now, I think Aston Martin's goal will be to secure P2 in the championship or hold on to it as long as they can. But obviously the intention to hold on to it. So they're going to be looking very much at Ferrari. Come on, that's what I'm trying to say.
You can tell
there.
we don't
Sorry
edit
for-
these podcasts, or at least very
Ferrari,
well.
that's what I was trying to say. And Red Bull, not Red Bull, Mercedes. They're not going to be looking at Red Bull. I've mixed up my teams there. I do apologize. They're going to be focusing on very much on their development and long-term development of the car, where Mercedes is going to be focusing very much on their lap time gain to Red Bull. Obviously, they would love to be in championship fight, but if they can half the lap time differential to Red Bull, that would be I think that'd be a very big achievement for them. Even if that's P2 or P3, but they've halved the time, I think that's their goal. Obviously the money aspect comes into Ferrari and Red Bull and the pride, but I think their lap track time is going to be more important to Mercedes right now than if they finish P2 or P3, because then it shows them that their development plan is working and they're going the right way with their changing concept or apparent changing concept, or the concept that's changing and the upgrades that are coming. And Ferrari, I think it's very much, unfortunately, stopping the slide, be it strategy, reliability, the actual obviously concept that we don't actually know if they're sticking with their concept or if they're going to abandon it, like Mercedes have been rumoring to abandon their concept. And I think it's very much key for them that they try and maintain their position and not just unfortunately being swamped by the rest of the grid, as if they stick with their concept and it's the wrong concept, for example, and they end up getting worse and worse and worse through the season as the other teams develop. So I think it's very much that they identify where they're going wrong, because they've had a terrible start to the season that were a lot worse than they wanted, and even we probably expected from them. And they need to stop that. And I think that's unfortunately very much their objective at the moment.
Yeah, I think what's going to be important for Ferrari this weekend in particular is to just try and have a clean race. I mean,
yeah,
the car's not been great. Admittedly, the drivers have probably not been at their best either, but for whatever reason, Ferrari, it will be really helpful for Ferrari to try and figure out where they really stack up right now, because we can all make the argument that, you know, under perfect conditions, everyone's on soft tyres, low fuel, Ferrari's the second fastest car on the grid over one lap. Only Red Bull is better than it. When it comes to race day, Ferrari go down the fourth fastest, and I don't think there's too much of an argument for that right now. That being said, we've had safety cars which have impacted Ferrari's races. We know the Ferraris really do struggle at following other cars this season, more so worryingly than it was last season, which is a concern. Charles Leclerc has had reliability issues, one of which prevented him an almost certain podium in Bahrain, which would have really helped Ferrari's cause if he was able to consolidate that. And individual mistakes from the drivers as well. And Leclerc in particular, a driver who has very lofty ambitions and the talent and skill set to match those. But right now he doesn't have the machinery underneath him, let alone the confidence and trust in the team that has brought him all the way through the ranks up to this position in F1 that he currently has, to not be able to see him through to the final part of it, which he's so desperately going to be wanting and perhaps seeking elsewhere if Ferrari aren't able to give that to him right now. So, for their sake, they definitely need to try and find a way to figure out where they're at and then make the decision on what they do next to go from there. And it has to be done pretty soon. So it will be interesting to see how Ferrari get on this weekend. And especially for Leclerc's sake, I know we talk about him a lot, but this is a driver this season who, he's already suffered the worst start to his Ferrari for a season with Ferrari. This could be the worst start to his career if he's not careful this weekend, and that would be a worrying thought. We should also mention that former Ferrari race director Laurent Meeks is going to be replacing Franz Tost at Alpha Tauri as the team principal, as Peter Bayer is named the new CEO there. That came as a bit of a surprise, because we were expecting Laurent Meeks to leave Ferrari and go to Alpha Tauri in a senior position. I didn't expect it to be a team principal role, so that one has surprised us, not necessarily because we didn't expect Franz Tost to step down, but I think it surprised us by the timing, because this would have been a decision, Lee, where if it was going to happen, it would be at the end of the season. I guess given how difficult the start has been for AlphaTauri, it does seem right now that maybe because they're worried about a sale long term, they don't really want Franz Tost being as bluntly honest as he has been about their lackluster performance so far at Alpha Tauri. So perhaps this is one where, respectfully, Franz has been moved aside, if you like, for someone new.
Well, respectfully moved aside. Obviously, there's been the rumours about Red Bull looking to sell. Obviously, as you said, it may be the not telling it honest. It could be that Red Bull may be looking to sell, but they want to up the value of the team by delivering a better level of performance before looking at it. They could be not looking to sell against the rumors are saying, and they actually like acknowledging that their second team isn't delivering the performance that they want, and they're investing and doubling down and building up this team. Either way, obviously, it's not so good for France, but it hopefully means that AlphaTauri get themselves together a bit more and come back to the competitive force they were a couple of years ago when you had the brilliant drives of Pierre winning at Monza, for example, and they're just bringing surprise results from a very good and well-rounded car.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for Laurent Meeks as well, it's a bit of a homecoming there. He started his career out with Minardi, which is what AlphaTauri was back in the day, back in 2002. So it'll be nice for him to go back, in similar vein in a way to James Vowles going to Williams, although he will pick up halfway through a process where James was able to start from the very beginning. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. And of course, it'll be interesting to see what Ferrari do. Ferrari have had a raft of changes, plenty of outgoings that have been reported. Of course, there have been rumours about plenty of incomings from rival teams, ones that haven't necessarily made the headlines, with the exception, of course, of Fred Vasseur replacing Mattia Binotto as the team principal there. So Ferrari do seem to be making some movement, but I guess the results of those, we're probably not going to really see how effective they are until they show themselves on the track, quite frankly.
Yeah, Ferrari are obviously trying to make maybe not like all the teams are, and it's just as I was mentioning, it's just they really hope that they can deliver on changes and obviously the Fred's long-term plan, and that Fred gets the opportunity to deliver his long-term plan. Because I would hate to see Fred's long-term plan or vision cut short.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick one on Red Bull, if we can, Lee. Looking ahead to this weekend, Red Bull obviously had a brilliant start of the season, finishing, obviously winning all 3 races so far. The only thing stopping them from getting a 1-2 in every single race so far this season was the issue for Sergio Perez in qualifying at the Australian Grand Prix. Otherwise, probably you could argue that he probably would have got that too. Looking into this Grand Prix, does Sergio Perez really need to stamp his authority on this race to ignite that championship challenge with Verstappen?
Sergio Perez definitely needs to stamp his authority this weekend. I'm not just saying that as to obviously make it an exciting championship, but for him, the aspect of he's been called the street king or the street circuit king or the street circuit specialist because all these victories seem to come at street circuits more often than not. So to live up to that reputation, which brings its own pressure on himself, to close that 15-point gap, he needs to go out there and obviously a clean sweep for him would be perfect. Get pole position, get sprint pole, get sprint race winner, go bam, fastest lap, just clean sweep. Obviously, Max is not going to let Sergio have it that easy, but Sergio definitely needs to focus on, for his own championship ambitions, is to close that 15-point gap.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of people when they hear us talking about this issue, or maybe they talk about it amongst themselves, probably go in with this mindset, well, it doesn't really matter what Perez does. What Red Bull wants is for Max to win the championship and to be the outright number one. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's incorrect or, that's not accurate. I do believe that Red Bull ideally would want a situation where both their drivers are fighting, relatively speaking, for a world championship. They want both their guys to be doing really, really well. Now, when it becomes a problem is when the two start clashing with each other and it creates civil unrest in the team, like we saw with Vettel and Webber in the past and what we saw with Ricciardo and Verstappen, albeit that wasn't for a championship, but it was still a battle for control within the team, which did create unnecessary tensions, and plenty of points and results were lost in the aftermath of that and as a result of the battle that ensued. So I do feel that there definitely is room for Perez to be fighting Verstappen for this championship right now, but at the same time, And I'm not using Australia as an outlier here. I'm just speaking from how things played out last season and how they could play out this season if Perez is not careful. They're in a position right now where they're so dominant and so strong, where they probably have more time to make this decision. But if Perez doesn't really make a mark on this championship soon, you will get to that point where he will start have to considering his options, because I know he doesn't want to leave Red Bull, but is he really happy being the second driver at Red Bull? Because the way Max sees it, Perez is a good supporting act for him, and he does a good job to help him out when he needs him. But I'm pretty certain that Perez doesn't look at it that way, and he genuinely wants to be the guy there. But right now, when all things are said and done, he doesn't really show that consistency and pace like Verstappen does, with all due respect.
Yeah, I definitely understand that point. I think there has to be a certain level of confidence Sergio in himself that he can take it to Max. But just being the fastest driver isn't the automatically mean you win in an inter-team battle. And I'm just going to refer to Lewis and Nico Rosberg in the 2016 championship. Nico was a very good driver. Was he the outright fastest as Lewis when Lewis was on it? No. But Nico knew how to play Lewis, knew how to poke him in the right spot, make him see red mist, knew how. And Sergio, if I'm not saying Sergio needs to do that, but if Sergio knows how to work his own Red Bull and understands Max as his teammate, we know Max does have some weaknesses. Every driver has some weaknesses, but if Sergio can exploit them, he could bring himself into a inter-team battle. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's definitely not out of the question that something like that could happen, especially, as I've said before, with the whole Monaco question over from last season and Brazil. There's definitely some grudges on both sides. So there's still opportunity for drama, so to put it, to come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will look at the championship right now and listen to us talking about this and think, guys, what are you talking about? It's 15 points. It's not a lot. And you're right. It really isn't. I mean, you know, we could see a situation this weekend where the championship does get turned on its head and Perez overtakes Max Verstappen and then it's game on. We could. But right now, you know, Perez, after Jeddah, put in a great performance. You know, you could argue to some degree that Max would have had a hard time beating him if Max wasn't starting at the back in that race or had a grid penalty. You know, we'll never know, but I think it's a fair point based on how well Perez was driving. But we are starting to see that as this championship goes on, the larger that gap gets, the harder it is going to be to justify Perez being in this championship. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, you know, beating Max Verstappen is one thing, but the last thing Perez is going to be in a position where he feels like the handbrake has been put on by his team because in their mind, he's not showing enough to try and take the fights and without it detrimenting the team as a whole. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, I know it's a bit left-winded on that one, but I digress. Alpine, we should talk about them. Interesting what happened at the Australian Grand Prix, Lee. If we rewind back to that, they had their incident after the final restart. And very interesting one actually, because both drivers after the race went to the stewards as it was being reviewed. Both accepted some portion of the blame, and I think that was tactical by the team to prevent them getting a post-race penalty. I 100% believe it was more on Gasly than Ocon in this situation. But that being said, we knew it wouldn't take much to potentially ignite this inter-team rivalry. And whilst both drivers have categorically denied that there's any ill feeling towards each other following the aftermath of what happened in Melbourne, I would be very surprised if their guards weren't up tenfold by the time we go to Baku this weekend, if they find each other on track. And it's very likely that they probably will.
Yeah, they seem both of them at the moment delivering similar levels of performance from the Alpine, and we know that Esteban has had incidents with his teammates at Baku in the past. So there could be all the potential for another inter-team clash where the Alpine drivers on the same piece of track, one way or another. And obviously, I don't wish there was an incident, but there's definitely the potential for a growing storm between these two drivers.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it'll be interesting to see. Alpine won't be happy by the fact that, despite the fact that they clearly have the fifth fastest car on the grid, although some people say the Haas, but I think that's more of a one lap than anything else rather than race trim. McLaren are still ahead of Alpine at this point in time. That's something they wouldn't have wanted. So those points that they lost obviously could be quite costly towards the end of the season. And if McLaren make the upgrades that they hope they make, they could find themselves on the same piece of track as them right now. So for Alpine, I think it's critical that if there is any animosity between the drivers, and I'm not trying to suggest that there is right now, I think it was probably, quite extreme to suggest on my part that, that they're at loggerheads with each other. But right now, they're going to have to make sure they nip that in the butt, really, and, prevent anything from any fallout from Melbourne really escalating further into potential issues that may arise this weekend on a street circuit, no less.
Yeah, I think very much Otmar will be trying to point it at, you have to beat Oscar Piastri, you have to beat that McLaren. You cannot be faster than the Alpine with their upgrades. They cannot just try and give them a target, so to speak, and let the two drivers go racing against another team and not each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Two drivers I want to talk about before we go to our predictions, Lee. Bottas and Magnussen. Now, K-Mag had a brilliant season last year. One of the surprises of the season, coming back to the Haas team. And really putting Mick Schumacher in his place, with all due respect to Mick. And people can talk about other issues, but, the facts are that Magnussen was better than Mick last season. We've seen Hulkenberg kind of, in a way, do to Magnussen what Magnussen did to Mick last season. Albeit, it was only a few races, but we can see Hulkenberg, especially in Melbourne, very, very impressive. And then we move to Alfa Romeo, and we have Valtteri Bottas. Now, Bottas finished 8th in Bahrain. Zhou finished, was it 9th in, was it Melbourne or was it Jeddah? I mean, I can't remember which one it was. But in the last two races, Bottas has really struggled to get on the pace. Now, I don't know if his head's in the game. I know he's had some reliability issues that have really held him back and it's not been ideal for him. But for whatever reason, Bottas just doesn't seem to be on it right now. Maybe that's just my observation. And given his situation and Magnussen's situation, one where they came from a position of strength last season, is there a concern that we have two experienced drivers, similar age as well, right now not currently enjoying themselves in their current situation with the cars that they seem to have?
I don't think it would be a concern just yet, although for both of the drivers, I'm sure they already have some slight concern that it's not going as well. But as fans, I think it's to be concerned. Obviously, the cars can be refined and you bring developments to bring the cars back towards the driver, especially in the development life cycle. So Valtteri and Kevin could obviously still turn it around and get the car in their sweet spots, which I really hope they do, because I obviously like to see them performing at their best and getting the most out of their machinery. But in the next few races, they start not turning it around. I think there'll be some growing concerns, probably more the fact for Kevin than Valtteri, because Valtteri's obviously proven himself a lot more than Kevin, unfortunately for Kevin. But the fact that a super sub Nico Hulkenberg has come in, and if you can trounce him for a third of a season or half a season, some really bad questions to be asked about Kevin. What value can he bring to the team if an older driver who was out of the sport for 3 years can come in and beat you? What benefit do you bring to the team? So I think it's really more a worry for Kevin than Valtteri at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have to wait and see how it all pans out. I know Gunther Steiner had plenty of interesting words to say on the Sky Sports F1 podcast that went out this week, talking about the situation with Mick Schumacher. And I totally understand the point that he was making. I know a lot has been said following the Drive to Survive series that came out over the winter about Gunther potentially being considered to be quite mean or difficult with Mick Schumacher. And then, of course, there was a lot of talk on Mick Schumacher's camp suggesting that too. But I totally get Gunther's point that, you can massage egos all you like. And I'm paraphrasing it. It's obviously not word for word what Gunther was saying, but the gist of it was that, the only benefit, there's no benefit to him wanting to try and, make drivers look bad. And it's not his fault that Mick was crashing the car. Ultimately, what he wants is the drivers to do the best job they can. And it's his responsibilities to make sure that they have the best drivers in place. And so, upon reflection, I totally understand that. And I think it's a dynamic that he probably didn't envisage he would have to manage with Magnussen. But given how great a start that Hülkenberg has made this season, wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't on his mind at this point in time.
Yeah, well, I do believe in that podcast you're talking about. He did talk about having Lewis Hamilton in the Haas.
Wouldn't that be something?
Obviously, at the cost of Mercedes, because he did say it would only happen if Mercedes paid Lewis's salary, which I don't think Mercedes would be that gracious.
No, probably not.
But it's definitely about having the best drivers and the team. And yeah, I'm sure he has his faith in Kevin. It's way too early to question Kevin's ability right now.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, as much as I like to make a story out of some of these things for the sake of content, of course, I genuinely don't believe for a second that Magnussen's under any serious pressure. But I'm sure after the first few races of the season and you have a bit of a break and time to reflect and compartmentalise everything, that perhaps some of these things are of concern. We'll have to wait and see. Now, let's go to the final part of the episode. As we do on these episodes, when we do previews, we like to do a prediction and do a prediction for qualifying and the race. But seeing as it is a sprint weekend, we're also going to do a prediction for the sprint race winner as well. We're not going to bother with the top three or whoever gets pole in the sprint race. We'll just keep it simple. And we'll do a pole position on Friday qualifying. We will do the winner of the sprint race. And we will do the top three for the main race and a bold prediction as well while we're at it, which, of course, if you remember, is double points. So, Lee, what predictions have you got for this weekend?
Okay, for pole position, I'm going to go out there and say Sergio Perez for pole. For the sprint winner, I would have said Max Verstappen. And then for the race results, for the top three, I would have said Sergio, Max, and Lewis Hamilton.
Okay. Do you know what? We haven't gone to a bold prediction, have we? Or do you want to save that to the end?
I can say my bold prediction.
Yeah, let's save the bold ones, yeah.
So if you don't accept it, I do have a reserve bold prediction. So my bold prediction is we're going to have a crash festival weekend with 3 safety cars in the main event. And I reckon we'll see a safety car in the sprint race as well.
Okay. I'll tell you what. Seeing as I'm feeling uber generous, I will accept that. If you get, and this is where we kind of break this down a little bit, so you're going to have to remind me when we do the review in case I forget on Sunday. If you get 1 safety car in the sprint, I will give you 2 points for that. If you get 3 safety cars in the main race on its own, I'll give you 2 points for that. If they both come in, you'll get 5 points for all of that.
Okay.
How does that sound?
Yeah, I like that.
Now, I know some of you are probably listening to this or watching this and thinking, well, you guys don't keep track of this. You're making it up. I do keep track of this. One of the, I think in the next race preview that we do, I'm going to have to put a live score update and, just to make sure we know how everybody's doing at this point in time. I don't know what the prize is again. It's probably just going to be bragging rights or some sort of league table. I don't know, but I'll put something up for the next preview just to remind you guys of how we're doing at this point. So we are keeping track for those of you that are probably wondering if we do or not. For me, I'm going to go with Verstappen pole. I'm going to go with Perez to win the sprint. And then I'm going to go with Max to win the main race. Perez to come second, and I'm gonna go with Alonso P3. It might be a bit boring, but no, I'm gonna go with Fernando Alonso. My bold prediction. Let's see. I'm gonna go double points for McLaren in the main race. I think that upgrade might catapult them up into the top 10. And I think they'll have a better weekend. I certainly hope that they do. I really do. I have a soft spot for McLaren, so maybe that's just me. But that's going to be my bold prediction for this weekend. Double points for McLaren in the main race. So, Yeah, I think that's all we've got time for, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And let us know your thoughts on the topics we discussed heading into this Azerbaijan Grand Prix. As we enter the 4th race of the F1 season, let us know in the comments on YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, like the video, and of course, don't forget to give us a 5-star review on your favorite pod platform. If you want to shout out and you do it on Spotify, you need to let us know on our social medias. There will be in the show notes, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see them on screen. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe. Enjoy the first F1 sprint weekend. I'll be interested to know your thoughts on how it all goes down and what you think of the new format. But until then, we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care, guys.
Goodbye.